Ducks fans, are you ready? You are listening to the Ducks and Pucks podcast with your hosts, Mike Walters and Eddie Jones. This is the number one home for Anaheim Ducks talk and analysis. Here we go.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Mike Walters, covering the Ducks here for you, along with my co-host Eddie Jones. And each week we bring to you action about the Ducks and the NHL. We recap the games and preview what's going on for the upcoming week, along with injury updates and news. And we also take your fan questions. So sit tight and hold on. We're going to go through this last week and get you some info. This week wasn't too bad for the Ducks. You know, they did better against the three opponents, New York, Boston, and New Jersey this week. They won 2 out of 3, Eddie. And the first game, the Ducks took on the New Jersey Devils, which the game started out 0-0 at the end of the first period. It looked like it was going to be a tight battle and maybe a low-scoring game. And then the second period, the Ducks exploded. The Kessler line basically went off. And from then on, Eddie, the Ducks dominated the Devils and ended up winning 7-1.
Yeah, and you knew going into this game that if you scored, 3 or 4 goals, you're gonna make it really hard on New Jersey to come back and get into this game. They don't score a ton of goals. I believe they're still last in the league in goal scoring. The Ducks were there at one point and they turned it around, but New Jersey struggled all season. Camilleri's still out for them. And it's tough. I mean, they got some guys going now. I mean, Devontae Smith-Pelly, he scored for New Jersey against the Ducks in that game, and he had 3 points the other night. He's got 9 points now in 7 games for them, so he's turned into a real goal scorer for them. But I mean, this game was one of the best games all season for the Ducks. I mean, the goal scoring was there, goaltending was there, everything was going right for them in this game, and obviously you see that in the final score.
Yeah, exactly. You got to see Silfverberg score his first career hat trick. You also saw Nick Ritchie finally get his first NHL goal. Very exciting. I was a little upset with myself. I didn't bring my hat. I was upgraded with my buddy Richard. We sat down lower, and I had it there for the Perry game, and that one ended up on the ice, but not this time, Eddie. But still, it was great to see Silfverberg get the hat trick, and Ritchie to finally get his first goal. Get that monkey off his back. And the biggest stat, too, that stood out to me in this game, Eddie, was the faceoff wins. The Ducks dominated in the circle, winning 42 of the 59 faceoffs. I mean, they just destroyed the Devils, controlled the play, and obviously it showed up on the scoreboard as well.
Yeah, they were taking advantage of some young players playing center in New Jersey. And yeah, I mean, Kessler and Getzlaf. And I mean, the Ducks have been good in faceoffs all year, but when you can get a game and dominate pretty much everything, as you mentioned faceoffs, but they dominated in every aspect of this game. I mean, there was nothing you could really fault them for. I mean, Devontae Smith-Pelly does get a goal to tie the game right after Cogliano did, but they ended up scoring 3 more before the halfway mark, and then you jump into the third period, and they jump on Keith Kincaid again and score 2 more goals, and he gets pulled, and then a minute later, Silfverberg scores on Jan Denis to make it 7-1. But this is something we've waited to see from Silfverberg. Not to say that his play has been bad, but to say this is his first hat trick is a little bit surprising. I mean, we've expected him to produce offensively for a while now since coming over in the Bobby Ryan trade, and it's nice to see him have such a great night, and that line just dominated the whole game.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, basically the Kessler line won this game for the Ducks. I mean, they just went off, scoring almost every single goal in this game, except for Perry and Ritchie. They both got a goal each in the third, but all the rest came from them. So it was a good game for the Ducks. They set a record this season, 7 goals in 1 game. So it was an exciting game, and it was definitely not a stressful game, especially in the third period. The Ducks then turned to face the New York Rangers on Wednesday night, and this was a completely different game, Eddie. This one was a defensive battle. The Ducks started out well. Jamie McGinn got a goal in the first period, and the Ducks were up 1-0 after the first period. But it was a tight battle. Not a lot of shots in this one, 23 apiece for each team, and unfortunately, the Ducks just came up short in this one. They could have played a little bit better. Too many turnovers, some missed shots on net. But it was unfortunate. I really thought the Ducks could at least go to overtime and get a point in this game.
Yeah, you really felt that they could have made it out there. Obviously, Klein getting a little bit of a lucky bounce on that last goal, but Yeah, I mean, both teams just came out and decided to play a defensive game in this one, and it really showed. I mean, we expected Ronta to probably get the start with the Kings playing the Rangers the night after, and you would expect them to come out hot and fire a bunch of shots on net and trying to get to the backup, but it didn't happen. And to Ronta's credit, he had a really good game. The Rangers blocked a ton of shots as well, and they just couldn't squeak out that point. It would have been really nice to see them actually finish this game with at least a point, or not, if not more.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a little bit frustrating, like you said. That last, goal, it goes off Lindholm's skate, ends up on Klein's stick, and if it doesn't hit his skate, maybe the pass doesn't connect, or Klein doesn't get the shot off, or whatnot. So it was, a little bit of a lucky break there for New York at the end, especially at the end of the game too. In the third period there, with only 5-6 minutes left to go. So a little unfortunate, and the Ducks had to turn it on when they went to play Boston on Friday night, which the Ducks had success against Boston earlier in the season. They won 6-2, and then this one the Ducks really went at it, Eddie. They got 2 early goals, 2 late goals, and they went on to rout Boston 4-0.
Yeah, Jamie McGinn, he scores the first goal in this game too for the Ducks, scoring on back-to-back games. Doing what Bob Murray brought him in to do is crash the net, gets a little bit of a lucky bounce off McQuaid and then off his shin, I believe, and into the net. And that's what they brought him in to do, and he's crashing the net and getting goals now, which is good for him too. And Kessler capitalizes on a pretty good rebound after I mean, a great burst of speed from Cogliano. I think we're all used to that now, and how quick he is. And they just had a strong game all around. I mean, Boston had their chances. I think this was one of Freddie's best games of the season. He stopped 38 shots for the shutout, and really staked his claim to be the number one goalie going into the playoffs.
Yeah, exactly. And we've got some fan questions about that. We're going to cover that in a little bit too. Freddie definitely played, I think, if not his best game, ever. Is definitely top 5. I mean, he stood on his head. He blocked all the shots. He had some big saves. I mean, Boston did, have some quality scoring chances despite the Ducks winning 4-0. So they had their opportunities, but just couldn't get it done. And we had a little bit of excitement in this game too. You got to see Stoner go against Chara there when things got a little bit rowdy in the third period. And a little interesting, you saw Chara take a couple swings. Stoner ducks, goes underneath and does the MMA takedown, Eddie. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, that wasn't really a fight. Well, yeah, it wasn't a fight, but Stoner was pretty smart. He didn't take any punches, and he was also merciful too. I mean, he could have decked Chara when he was down, but he showed respect there and let it go.
Yeah, and I mean, kudos to him for taking on the big guy, and I mean, probably the biggest guy in the league right now. I don't think anyone would want to fight him, but Stoner's got to do what he can. He's got to use the tools that he has to try and stay in this Ducks lineup. I mean, Josh Manchin has excelled, and we don't really see him being scratched, or I don't think he can even be sent down at this point. And he's got to do what he can to stay in the lineup, and right now, if that's taking on a guy like Char, then kudos to him.
Yeah, it was definitely a highlight. And if you haven't seen it, you can go on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/DucksNPucks podcast. It's up on there. And it's also in the game recap, too, on DucksNPucks.com. So you can go watch it. Oh, and it's Twitter, too. So you can watch it wherever. It's all over the place. We plastered it because we knew that people would be excited if you weren't at the game or, by chance you missed it. A little bit of news, too, to mention about our podcast. We actually picked up a couple sponsors in this last week. So this podcast, we have one sponsor on, and then we'll have one for another couple of the episodes. So there's some people out there that like to listen to Eddie because, Eddie knows what he's talking about. And I kind of do sometimes, but, it's just kind of the way it goes. But no, in all seriousness, we do appreciate it. We picked up a couple sponsors, and I just wanted to mention that this one is brought to you by the East Hills Cleaners, which is located in Anaheim Hills on 8285 East Santa Ana Canyon Road. Which is at the corner of Santa Ana Canyon Road and Weir Canyon off the 91 freeway. And they've been in business since 1990. They're very affordable. They're good cleaners to go check out. And also their phone number is 714-998-5199. And additionally, you can check them out on Facebook at facebook.com/East Cleaners. So check them out. They're our first sponsor. We have another one coming up next week. We really appreciate it. If you do want to sponsor a show, you can always send us an email or hit us up on social media, and we'll give you some pricing and talk about things like that. Some people recently, Eddie talked about our show and had mentioned to myself that it's a great show and that they like it, and also how we make money. And I I kind of laughed. I told him, well, we don't really make money. I mean, this is our first sponsor this time around, so it's just nice to have, and we really appreciate it. And with that, we'll get back to the action here. A lot of stuff going on this week in terms of fan questions, things about the lineup, what's going to happen down the stretch, the playoffs. I mean, just all kinds of stuff. You guys want to know a lot about everything, which is great. And we're going to get to some of these questions here. I think the biggest one, and we were just talking about it with Freddie's play in the Boston game, and we've had 2 or 3 questions on here about this, is, who is going to be the Ducks starting goalie? What about the 2-game rotation, the 1A, the 1B goalie, all of that? I'm kind of just summarizing here a bunch of questions, but I'll kind of go a little bit first on this, Eddie, and I think most will agree that, the 2 goalie rotation has worked. It's done well. The Ducks have been winning. Yeah, they lost a couple games recently, but as the playoffs come, I think it's time to pick somebody, and I think it's time to pick Andersen. You got to look at the way he's played, Eddie. Going back to December 21st, that was the first game, not the first game, but the most recent game where he had a poor performance. He gave up 3 goals on 11 shots. But since then, he's been stellar. I mean, he's gone 15-1-2 since that December 21st game. And he's just played outstanding. And that's the guy who I would go with, Eddie, if you look at. He also leads the league in starting goalies since the 21st in goals against and save percentage, with 1.77 goals against and 9.37 save percentage. And I'm not knocking Gibson at all. Gibson's a great goalie too, but I just think right now Andersen's been playing a little bit better, and that's the guy we should go with, Eddie.
Yeah, I mean, you can't discount those numbers. I mean, if he's been the best goalie since Christmas, how do you not go with him to go in the playoffs? That means he's not only better than Gibson, he's done better than Gibson has. He's done better than everybody. And if you want to ride anybody into the playoffs, you want to ride the hottest guy and the guy who's doing the best over the longest period of time. And right now, that's Freddie. And we saw that in the game against Boston. And he really hasn't had a game where he struggled. I mean, maybe you could say the St. Louis game, but some of the goals weren't his fault. There was a lot of turnovers. It was kind of tough to really put any blame on him in that. And other than that, he's been close to perfect. In each game that he's played since then, the record speaks for itself. And like you said, I think if you got to go with somebody right now, you got to go with Freddie.
Yeah, I agree. And it looks like Gibson is probably going to go in the Winnipeg game. We'll see, because, obviously Andersen went in the Boston game because Gibson wasn't feeling well. But I did have a friend today go to practice and give me some updates. I was busy running around doing some personal stuff. I do have a life outside hockey somewhat, but a friend went and told me that Gibson was practicing very well today and looked very sharp, looked like he's ready to go. So it looks like Gibson will go in that game against the Jets tomorrow, which, don't forget, we will have a watch party for that as well at El Ranchito in Orange. If you haven't been down there, it's in the Orange Circle. I'll post some more stuff on the internet and whatnot tonight, and obviously on the day of the games, and so that way you guys can all know about it. But if you can come out and check it out, that'd be great. I know it's a Sunday and it's at 12, so if you get done with church and hopefully you want to come over and watch some hockey, we'll be there. But with that, we got more questions too as well. I guess the biggest other questions is about injuries. That we had Melissa asked about Sammy Vatanen and when he's coming back. Unfortunately, we haven't heard anything really other than he's day to day. Upper body injury. He took that elbow to the head, and I really think that it could be something similar to Dupree getting hit in the head. I don't know that. I'm just saying based upon Dupree getting elbowed in the head as well. So it may be something like that where. It may take a little bit of time before Vatanen comes back. We're really not sure. We did see Bieksa come back in the game on Friday against Boston. We also know that Thompson is out as well, Eddie, with a lower body injury. And this kind of leads into the other question that we had from Thomas, too, as well. He asks about the lineups and what do we think we'll see when everybody's healthy. And what do you think? It's going to be interesting because we still have Stewart, too, that's out there ready to come back. And we saw him running up the ramp on Honda Center. If you didn't see it on Twitter, one of the athletic trainers I follow, I commented on it. But it looks like he's going to be back too soon, Eddie.
Yeah, and I mean, starting with Sammy Vatanen, I think the Ducks really felt, the ills of his loss In the first few games, we saw them play Colorado and St. Louis, where they lost both of those games, and they were struggling sending defensemen into the rush, especially against St. Louis. There'd be times where the only guys forward were the three forwards, and guys were trying to jump into the play, and it just wasn't the same. I mean that's where Vatanen has been the best for the Ducks this year is jumping up into the play and becoming that fourth man forward, and I think they missed him for those games. They've kind of turned it around as of late and figured a way around that and have obviously been able to put up a lot of goals over the past three games, especially. I mean, the game against New Jersey is helping that a lot. But putting against four against Boston as well, they've kind of turned it around a bit. But having him back is going to be a big boost for the Ducks, especially for their power play, which, I mean, remarkably is still tied for first in the NHL. But getting everybody back healthy is just going to make this team even better, which is got to be scary for some of the other teams around the league. I mean, we just beat up on New Jersey 7-1, beat the Bruins, who are doing pretty well lately, 4-0. So to get a guy like Stewart back, who's a top 9 player, and to get Thompson back for the fourth line, and obviously to get Vatanen back is going to give a huge boost to this team heading into the playoffs.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see what the Ducks do with the lineup, because another thing that was noticed today at practice was Getzlaf and Perry skated with McGinn again today at practice, which Boudreau switched up and put Getzlaf and Perry back together, which, if you remember, they hadn't done that going all the way back to January when they played the Kings. They had switched it up and split them in that third period back on January 17th when the Ducks, they lost that game, but they split them up, and they've kept them split since that time. So Friday was the first game we saw them back together with McGinn. Obviously, it worked. I mean, they scored right away. And it's going to be interesting to see, since they practiced today, together again. I think the lineup is going to stay the same, at least for this next, couple games. Maybe we'll see if anything changes, but it's going to be interesting when Stewart comes back, because then the question is do you go back to the Getzlaf, Perron, Stewart line? And I think that's something that's going to be a big question, because if you stay with McGinn, Perry, and Getzlaf, then it's going to kind of throw a wrench at you. I kind of think that's where the lineup's going to kind of teeter, because you keep Cogliano, Kessler, and Silverberg together. We've seen that line together almost the whole season. And then the fourth line, that's going to be Horkoff, Thompson, Santorelli, Garbett. Those kind of guys are going to be down most likely on the fourth line. So I really think it's going to teeter on whether or not they want to go with Getzlaf and Perry together, or they want to split them up.
Yeah, and you got to remember too, this is not a bad problem to have. I mean, this just shows the depth that the Ducks have, and the ability to move guys around and really create a new look against different opponents. I mean, you can really surprise some teams who have watched film and been ready for one type of Ducks team, and then you bring out another one. I think it really helps out in that aspect. I mean, you could throw Getzlaf, Perry, and McGinn together, and obviously put the Twins together and really surprise the team, and just overload them with that one line, or you could separate them, which we've seen, which I've personally liked, and it's worked out for that long stretch where they actually separated Getzlaf and Perry, and we saw Perry playing with Raquel and Getzlaf playing with Perron for the majority of that time. And I would like to see Getzlaf, Perron, and Stewart when Stewart comes back and he's healthy, and Perry go back down with Raquel and maybe send McGinn down to that line, and I think it just disperses the skill, disperses the size, and it really gives you three, even four lines where you can roll it and they can do the job effectively.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think the best part about this is the Ducks have a balanced attack. They can roll all four lines, and they can make an in-game change if they have to. And we've seen that a couple times. We saw that against the Kings back in January, but we've seen it in a few other games along the way too. So and that's part of the matchup. That's part of being a good coach, is being able to change the lines too during the game when it's not working. We've seen some of the other coaches, the Kings and the Sharks, and the Kings and the Hawks actually do that in the playoffs the best. And that's what the Ducks are probably going to have to do. And that gives us, some more of our questions here that aim at the playoffs as well. We had Darren asks about the Ducks going to the playoffs, who would they want to face in the first round? And we talked about this. I know Dan Wood and Steve Carroll talked about this. We really want them to win the division, not so much that they need to win the division, but then they would end up, facing someone probably in Central and probably Minnesota is probably the one I think we mentioned before that we would like them to see. The way it's going now, there's 12 games to go. They're 4 points behind. The Kings are in action tonight, so that may or may not change. But I don't know. It looks like the Ducks may play the Sharks in the first round, Eddie.
Yeah, and either way, it's not it's not an easy trip to the final if that's where they're, obviously that's where they would like to go and they'd end up liking to win the Stanley Cup, but it's not easy. You most likely got to play the Sharks in the first round if they can turn it around and win the Pacific Division for the fourth straight year. You've still got, like you said, the Wild possibly, or the Nashville Predators waiting for you, and Nashville's slowly easing away from the rest of the wild card teams and really solidifying that number one wild card spot. And if the Ducks end up winning the Pacific, that's who they're going to face. And Colorado has actually moved in over top of Minnesota right now, and they look likely to play whoever wins the Central, unless the Ducks can catch one of those Central teams in points, which is going to be tough with only 12 games remaining. But it's just not easy. Any of those three teams that they have to face is going to be tough, and then you look at a second round matchup possibly against the Kings, if they can beat their wild card team, and then you've got a heavyweight division, Central Division team waiting for you in the third round, and Chicago, Dallas, St. Louis, take your pick, and if you manage to get all the way to the final there, it's a realistic chance you probably got to face the league's best team in the Washington Capitals. I don't think anybody's betting against them in the East. That's a tough road to the Stanley Cup. I think the Ducks can do it, but they're gonna have to dig deep and win a lot of close games.
Yeah, and that's kind of another question that George asked us. He said, the Ducks have gone one round further each year, in the last three postseasons. And do you think they'll make it to the Stanley Cup final this year? I really think that they can make it. And I think it's going to depend on a couple things here. One is the team's got to be 100% healthy. Like we said, Vatanen, Thompson, they got to get back. Stewart's got to get back. I think that they will be all back by the time the playoffs start, and the Ducks will be ready to roll. And obviously, pending we don't want anything to happen between now and then. It's only a couple weeks to go. But that's the first thing: is the team's got to stay healthy going into the playoffs. Two is they're going to have the depth if they're healthy. They're going to have the balanced attack, and as long as they are able to keep rolling the four lines and scoring, then they should do fine as far as the playoffs. They should be able to go deep. Then the third thing, and we've mentioned it before, and it's kind of been beating a dead horse, but it's the goalie situation. Boudreau's going to have to pick one and roll with it. And if he's going to go with Gibson, then go with Gibson. If he goes with Freddie, goes with Freddie. I already gave my or both of us gave our stance on that. So those are kind of my three things that I look at, Eddie. Obviously matchups. You can't always control the matchups. You just don't know. You got to keep just playing the games and winning. You can't always worry about who's winning and who's losing. With the exception, obviously, of the Kings, because we're trying to, catch them at first. But other than that, those are my top three things that if they fall into place, I think the Ducks can go far this year.
Yeah, and you look at you mentioned how they've gone farther and farther each of the past few years, and they've added things to their game in each of those years. They've added depth by bringing in Ryan Kesler. They've added size. They've added the ability to actually effectively roll four lines, bringing in Gibson and Freddie last year to start and be number one goaltenders. And this year, I think the thing that has changed and that will take them that next step further is playing that defensive style, which is now creating offense for them. But they're in the top 10 in the league and possibly top 5 in goals against per game still. And you look at the teams who have won the Stanley Cup over the last 5 years, all of them have been either 1 or 2 in goals against per game at the end of the season. Another thing, too, is the special teams. That's something we haven't seen in a long time, where both sides of special teams have been so good. And right now, the Ducks are leading the league in both categories. They're leading the league in penalty kill by 3% right now, which is a lot over the New York Islanders. And they're tied for first with the league's best team, the Washington Capitals, in power play. And that's something we haven't seen in a long time. We always wondered over the past few seasons is how is a power play so bad? We got the skill on this team. Getzlaf, Perry, Raquel, guys who should be able to score on the power play, and it just hasn't happened. And this year it's clicked, and credit to whoever's running the power play right now. But that's the step forward this year that the Ducks needed to take, and I think that's what's going to take them further into the Stanley Cup Finals this year.
I agree, Eddie. The special teams, like you talked about, is huge. And when you're leading the league in both, that's amazing because usually teams you'll see they'll be very good at one or the other, or maybe great at one and maybe okay at the other. But you don't always see a team up there in the top five in both for so long. And like you said, the Ducks defense the whole season has been there. It was the offense in the beginning that we had the issue with. The only other concern, really, I would say, would be Game 7, which everybody, of course, brings that up because it's been 3 years in a row, and you all know the story. Don't really need to repeat it. But my concern is not really Game 7. I don't worry about Game 7. I worry about the Ducks closing out teams in Game 6s. And I try to harp on that a lot because that's what happened before these 3 Game 7s. They lost a Game 6 when they could have closed it out all 3 times: Detroit, LA, and the Hawks. So to me, if for some reason they get to that situation again, it may not be like last year where you beat Winnipeg and Calgary in 4 or 5 games. We may not see that right away. We may face the Sharks right away and go to a 7-game series or a 6-game series or whatever. But that's probably the only other thing I would say, Eddie, is all the other stuff we've got going, like we mentioned, getting healthy, the depth, the special teams has all been great. But the goalie and the team need to win those closeout games, especially if it's a Game 6. I don't care if it's on the road or at home.
Yeah, and they've got experience in those situations now, which never hurts. Freddie's been there now. The whole team was there obviously last year and suffered that Game 7 loss, and like you said, the Game 6 loss against the Blackhawks, where they could have closed it out, and it's tough to be in those situations. But when you go through those, and they're going to learn from those situations, and hopefully this year, if they get in that situation to close it out, they have the experience to reach back and say, remember when this happened last year? We couldn't go into the Game 7, could have closed it out in Game 6. They'll look back to that and hopefully be able to move on from that this year.
I agree, and it's going to be exciting. I mean, the Ducks are in the thick of things now. Most likely they're going to end up in first or second in the Pacific. We're going to have to see how it plays out. They are going to play the Kings one more time, right there towards the end of the season. The Ducks also get Washington at the very last game of the season, which, I'm not a fortune teller, but I'm pretty sure in that game, Washington's not going to play most of their players. We may not either. It depends on what happens, but that we may be able to pull that game out if it gets in a situation where we're right there with the Kings and say Washington rests their players in that game, Eddie.
Yeah, I think it all depends. Like you said, Washington has already clinched a playoff spot. It won't be long before they start resting players soon. They'll I think they're working on clinching up the Eastern Conference and most likely the President's Trophy. And when you see them do that, you'll see a lot of guys like Ovechkin, Backstrom. They'll set the last few games of the season, and we get lucky in that game, be able to pick up a couple points if we're close against a team like that, and if we're in the race still for the Pacific Division lead, which is looking to shape up to most likely be the situation, we could benefit from a team playing a team like that at the end of the season.
Yeah, and if you look at the schedule coming up this week, and I don't want to get too confident, but the Ducks are going to go on this Canadian road trip. And they're going to be playing teams that aren't necessarily contending teams. They're going to go to Winnipeg. You got Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, and Edmonton, and then they come back home against Calgary to close out this month. I mean, these are games that I'm not going to say the Ducks are going to go 6-0 on all these, but I mean the Ducks should definitely win 4 or 5 of these games coming up here, Eddie.
Yeah, for sure. And I honestly think the toughest game is going to be the one coming up on Sunday against the Winnipeg Jets. They have been struggling as of late, but they're relatively healthy. Mark Scheifele's playing really well for them lately. Marco Dano, who's coming from the Blackhawks and the Andrew Ladd trade, has been good for them. And I think they're trending upwards right now with a lot of their younger players. And I think that's going to be the toughest game, and that's going to set the mark for the next few games coming up. And after that, Montreal just lost 5-0 to the Senators tonight. So I think realistically the matchups in these games are in Anaheim's favor. Turris is out for Ottawa, Bozak and Kadri are not in for the Leafs. So you've got matchups, pretty easy matchups for the likes of Ryan Kessler and Ryan Getzlaf and all the centers in the Ducks organization. You're going to be going up against younger guys and more inexperienced guys in the faceoff dot, and you're going to control the game. The Ducks control the game really well in the possession stats, and it's going to be a lot easier in these types of games against younger teams and teams who are really on the outside looking in right now. So the Ducks should win those 3 games heading down into Ontario and against Montreal. So I think this should be able to, the chance the Ducks should take to start catching the Kings.
Yeah, I agree. This week, it's going to be a good week. I feel it. I think that they're going to do well. Like, I agree with you. The Jets are probably going to be the toughest. I think, the Toronto Maple Leafs are probably going to want a little bit of payback against them. Granted, the refs didn't really help us in that game, but, I think the Ducks are really going to be motivated for that one as well. And, also Edmonton and Calgary, the Ducks have played well against them additionally. So, the schedule looks favorable in the rest of March, the way they're going to close it out. Then come April, it's going to be a little bit more intense. You're going to have Dallas, you're going to have the Kings, Washington, Winnipeg again, Colorado, who, has just owned us this year. So hopefully we can turn that one around. But, I really think if the Ducks can turn it on here and finish the month strong, then, anything can happen with the last 6 games in April, Eddie.
Yeah, for sure. And there are some tough games in there right now, and that's why you want to win these games this week. You want to go against the teams that you should be beating, and you want to go in there and handle it pretty easily. And no game is easy in the NHL, but when you're playing these teams that are near the bottom of the standings and that are also struggling right now, I believe all four of these teams are below 500 in their last 10 games. So these are games you got to go into and you got to win. So you have those games in hand when you go into a tough game against Colorado, who have done really well against us lately. And like we said, the game against the the Capitals, and the game against the Kings, where you've got tougher games where if you've won those games, you should have won. You go into those games with a little bit of a cushion.
Yeah, I agree. And what's tough too is even though the Ducks are still chasing the Kings, don't forget the tiebreakers, the regulation and overtime wins. And if you look at that right now, the Ducks are 5 behind the Kings. Kings have 41 regulation or overtime victories, and Ducks have 36. So not only is there 12 games left, and the Ducks are 4 points behind, but it's almost like the Ducks are 5 points behind because I don't see them winning, 5 or 6 more games in regulation than the Kings, unless the Kings just completely collapse in this next 2-3 weeks. So the Ducks are really going to have to be on it if they're going to take over first and then hope to play one of the wild card teams. But again, like we said, the Ducks just got to keep doing what they're doing. They played much better this week. The week before, had a few issues, but I think they'll be on track and do well. And it'll just be interesting to see. I just really hope that they, decide to go with one goalie here in the last couple weeks and get healthy, and then just go from there, Eddie.
Yeah, and I think we got to look at the big picture too. We got to be happy that they're actually in the spot that they are at right now. We look at the beginning of the season and we wondered, would this team make the playoffs? I mean, that's how bad that start was, and obviously they turned it around. And you look where they are now. I think we just got to be happy that the playoffs are a realistic thing. I don't even think with a massive breakdown right now, you'd pretty much have to lose every game to get caught by one of those other Pacific Division teams like Vancouver, Arizona. So, just looking at that on the bright side, I mean, even if we don't win the Pacific Division, you're still in a playoff spot and you're playing so well right now. I don't think anybody wants to play the Ducks in the first round.
No, I agree. And, it's going to be interesting to see how it pans out. Some of the other news that came out too is, you see Dallas, they're over there in the Central leading the division right now. But then the news came out that they just lost Tyler Seguin for 3 to 4 weeks, which, it's going to be interesting to see who comes out first in that division. And in our fantasy hockey league, which you've been killing everybody, I've been fighting out this week. I don't know if I'm going to win, but I have Seguin on my team, so that kind of hurts me too. So, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the Central too, Eddie.
Yeah, and that's been a battle all year. I mean, we've got the teams that people thought were going to be a little bit stronger fighting back into it now. I mean, the Colorado Avalanche are coming back into the race, and they've actually picked up a serious injury too, as McKinnon is out, and nobody knows for how long right now. Don't know if it's long term or day to day. So that's a big blow for them if he's out long term and their playoff hopes. But you've got Minnesota still fighting over there. Nashville's giving them a little bit of a cushion in that wild card spot, and then you've got the 3 juggernauts in the Stars and the Blackhawks and the Blues, and those are teams nobody wants to face, and the race is alive for all of them to win the Central Division and gain home ice advantage through the first 3 rounds.
Yeah, and it's going to be fun. That's what it's going to be, people, and that's why we love hockey. It's going to be fun. The races. I mean, obviously we're Ducks fans, but we also like to watch hockey of the other teams as well, and it's going to be exciting to see what happens here in the next 3-4 weeks as the season winds down. and April approaches. Some other news too around the league is the GMs got together, Eddie, and I know we had kind of talked about this before. And there's some changes that they want to do, and it's kind of interesting. What do you think about all this? Some of the stuff they want to change on the power plays and the goalie pads and whatnot. What are your thoughts on some of these ideas?
Yeah, there's a lot of possible rule changes getting discussed. I mean, there's also the possibility of the expansion draft, which we'll discuss it in a little bit. But right now we have the goalie pads being the central issue, and at least for next season, we'll see some changes probably in the shoulder pads and the chest plate and the pants size. And I don't see too much issue with goal scoring. I mean, the Ducks just won 7-1, and I know that's not the consensus. The points are down in general for leading scorers, and there's not too many guys who are going to get over 100 this season, if any other than Patrick Kane. So I can see in that aspect how goal scoring has gone down, but there are some goalies who are taking advantage of it, and it's a tough situation. I mean, they are going to make changes. And it's going to affect some goalies more than others, and it really hits home with the Ducks if they do decide to keep Andersen. A guy like Andersen who's a more stand-up kind of goalie, he uses his size. Taking that a little bit of that away from him could affect him. And then you look at Gibson, who's more of an athletic goalie. It's not going to affect him as much because he doesn't really use his size as much as he uses his athletic ability. So it's an interesting situation, and it'll be cool to see how it really changes the way goalies play.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really a big fan of them changing it, but I understand if there's guys abusing it and they're wearing, extra large pads and extra large jerseys and all these other things. I get it. You got to have some kind of line drawn to where these guys aren't going to, go overboard and whatnot. So I get it from that standpoint. As far as the scoring goes, I love the sport the way it is right now. I don't really think there's an issue with the scoring, and they kind of brought up the issue of the power plays too. They kind of going along the line of scoring, is that they want to see some ideas that have come up. These aren't for sure yet, but they had talked about doing away with icing when you're on the penalty kill, and also making power plays basically you can score at will, just like a 5-minute major. Well, that would be a 2-minute power play or a 4-minute double minor or whatever. And some other ideas to obviously get more offense going. And I don't like those ideas either. Just leave the special teams play the way it is. So that's something that I hope that they don't do, Eddie.
Yeah, and they talk about a lot of things at these meetings, and I think right now the only thing that is actually going to happen is some change to the goalie's pad size. I mean, changing the penalty kill so you can't ice the puck is a pretty major change. If you think about it, and it really limits what you can do on the penalty kill. And I don't think it's something that a lot of GMs probably agreed to. I think they'd like to keep it the same. It's not something you really have to change. I mean, all the rules that they're looking at, they're just trying to find ways to make goal scoring happen more often. And I think they'll start with the goalie pads. They'll see how much that affects goal scoring. If it doesn't, they'll revisit, making the nets bigger, because we're looking at the size of goalies increasing. Look at Ben Bishop and Pekka Rinne. Those guys are over 6'6". So, I mean, that could also be an issue. If having the power play where you can score at will, that's another one that I don't think a lot of people would be in for. They're just looking for more options to increase goal scoring, league wide.
Yeah, exactly. And they keep talking about it, and this isn't going to go away. I guess the only other thing I do like is the cameras. They're going to have more of those, in the playoff teams. As far as determining the reviews involving the goals, Eddie, and that's one thing I'm really big on, because we've seen these games in the playoffs. A big one was Chicago and the Kings in the Western Conference Final a couple of years ago. There were some goals there scored by LA where, I'm sorry, they were actually offsides. And, these cameras should probably help in those reviews with the offsides and whether or not the puck goes over the goal line.
Yeah, and really, I think they've done a good job so far with the the goal crease cams and being able to see if a puck actually crosses the line. I think they've done a good job with that all season. But it is the offside calls which have become an issue and really central discussions for GMs at the GM meetings. And installing those blue line cameras in the playoffs into all arenas for playoff teams is really a trial run, and it's going to see if it improves it. And I think it will. I mean, having that angle available to Toronto, we might not see that in game, but having that available to the guys who are making the decision and dealing that decision out to the referees is big for them, and I think it's going to make a huge difference in ensuring that the right call is made.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And those are the things that are coming up now. If something else comes up, obviously we'll keep you abreast of the situation when some other things are updated or changed or whatnot. I guess today's also an anniversary too that you wanted to talk about, Eddie, as far as hockey goes. Something about games being played earlier than normal happened on this date sometime in the past.
Yeah, I saw it on NHL.com. It was this day in history. It was the first afternoon game or day game in NHL history to occur, and it was between the Chicago Blackhawks and Detroit Red Wings all the way back in 1933, if I remember correctly. So, we've been seeing them a lot of those games on Sundays and Saturdays and weekends where, I mean, the Ducks have to end up playing at 2:30 or 3:30 my time, and probably earlier for you guys, sometimes at noon. So. I mean, that's where it all started. I kind of saw the NHL.com today and thought that was pretty cool.
And one other little bit of news too in the NHL is the expansion draft. We had a couple questions about that too. People are worried about protecting players and whatnot. What's going to happen? Because if you remember when the then Mighty Ducks and the Florida Panthers came into the league in 1993, they had an expansion draft. And what happened is each team was allowed to protect a set number of forwards, defensemen, and goalies. And that's actually how the Ducks were able to get Guy Bear. They snatched him away from another team. So a lot of people were concerned about this with the expansion draft, Eddie, and the Ducks losing players. I'm not too worried about it because I don't think it's going to happen for a couple seasons. But are you worried, or is there anybody that you'd be concerned that if when the draft goes into effect and they lose maybe one or two players to the Vegas team or one of the other teams?
Well, I mean, a lot of people are concerned right now, and you have to remember that this doesn't happen until as early as next season's draft. So you have to look at some of the guys that we probably won't have. This kind of influences the situation with the goalies. Maybe you don't want to sign Freddie Andersen this season and risk losing him to nothing to an expansion team. It adds a little bit more, an element to the decision on that trade. So maybe you deal him in the offseason and you don't have to worry about it. And I think that's our big issue right now is, I mean, nobody wants to lose Freddie for nothing. And honestly, I would love to see him stay at the team. I think he's a number one goalie, but, with Gibby playing well as right now for the Ducks, I think, you can't protect two goalies. You only protect seven forwards, three defensemen, and one goalie. And none of them have a no move clause, which is something that's still being worked on if you can protect it. So, there's a chance that you're going to lose one of them, and we're going to protect Gibby because of his age. So, Freddie's on the goaltender side is a guy you might want to move before that decision comes around. And, the Ducks have depth too, and a new franchise team is going to be looking for them. And, a guy who might be on the move come the expansion time to most likely a team in Vegas is Simon Dupre. And you look at the Ducks are probably going to try and keep Fowler, Lindholm. If Vatanen is still with the team, he'll be a guy that's there as well that they'll look to keep. And that opens the door to a guy like Simon Dupre going to an expansion team as he'd be one of the the prize assets available to a team looking for a good young defenseman. As for forwards, I think it's not too big of an issue. Obviously, there's a lot of guys with no move clause. Getzlaf, Perry, Cogliano, Kessler. If no move clauses end up being automatic, automatic safety for teams, the Ducks don't have to worry about protecting those guys. So then you can focus on some of the depth guys. You can protect Raquel, you can protect Silverberg and other guys, and I think they'd be okay in forward depths. I think the big issue here is moving Freddie before you lose him for nothing.
Yeah, I agree, and that's a concern. Some fans have brought that up to my attention at the games this week about Andersen and the off season. I mean, obviously we got to worry about the rest of this season, the playoffs, but just for argument's sake now. Part of the issue is the Ducks, they stay under the cap. And they, you see this all the time. They stay under 7, 8, 9 million, somewhere in that range, usually at any given time. So if the Ducks did want to keep Andersen, they'd have to, go out and spend the money. I mean, they're most likely going to try to keep Lindholm and Raquel. We've talked about this. Those are probably the biggest two RFAs that they're going to try and keep. But if they wanted to play closer to the cap, they could try to keep Andersen. But it's going to be difficult. I mean, he's worth 4 or 5 million at least to some other team for sure. So, I mean, you got Gibson for 2.3 the next couple seasons, which is relatively inexpensive for a starting goalie, especially one of his caliber. So there's going to be some big decisions that are going to have to be made by Murray in the summer, and I do not envy him at all after this season's over, Eddie.
Yeah, and you got to look at it from this point too. Is Freddie's value is higher than it might ever be at this time right now? I mean, you mentioned the stats where he is right now. Possibly he'll be the Ducks goalie going into the postseason, and if he leads them to a Stanley Cup, I mean, his value will be as high as it will ever be. And imagine the return the Ducks get for him. I mean, right now their prospect pool isn't as deep as it is with a lot of guys being promoted. Obviously, Richie Raquel. Theodore Montour on his way. So, I mean, they've got to add some more forward prospects to the mix, and the package that you could get for a legitimate number one goalie, possibly a goalie that leads you to a Stanley Cup. I mean, it would be tough to let him go, but it's a tough situation for the GM, and re-signing him, creates a lot of problems down the road. So I think, selling him high and getting such a high reward for him, benefits the Ducks in all ways.
I agree, and then that may be what happens. We'll have to wait and see. For now, we'll watch the Ducks and see them compete, in the Pacific Division, see how they do. If they end up in first or second, most likely, we hope, as the season winds down. Don't forget, tomorrow we'll be at El Ranchito in Orange to watch the Winnipeg Jets and the Ducks at 12 o'clock. Hopefully you can join us there. We've got a lot of good giveaways and fun. We're also giving away 2 tickets to Fan Appreciation Night. If you listened to the podcast last week, we had a keyword on there, and we have a keyword this week. The word is cup, C-U-P. Again, the word is cup for this show. And then the next show we'll have a word, and you put all 3 together in a phrase, and then you just email it to us at info@DucksNPucks.com. That'll get you entered in to win those 2 tickets, which they're aisle seats, the side that the Ducks attack twice when the Ducks play the Jets in April, not this week, obviously. So look for that. We also got another second pair of tickets as well, which we're going to do a different kind of giveaway for those. So I'll be putting that out probably in the next week or 2 after we give away this set. So there's some good giveaways, and that game's a fun game. You get to go there and get some free stuff. Hopefully, the Ducks give away a lot of stuff in that game, which is just a fun event for anybody that's gone on Fan Appreciation Night. And that's pretty much going to wrap it up for the show this week. We'll be back next week, and hopefully we'll see where the Ducks are at. Maybe they're in first or second, Eddie, but we'll see how it goes next week.